You're listening to 3rd Wave Trade Talks, a podcast that explores the dynamic world of global trade and compliance. I'm Grant Sernick, Head of Sales and Marketing at 3rd Wave, where we empower businesses to master the complexities of international trade. Join me as I sit down with industry experts, innovators, and thought leaders to explore the trends, challenges, and insights that shape the future of global trade. Brian Glick, welcome to the show. How you doing?
Good. Thanks for having me.
It really is my pleasure, our pleasure, and we appreciate you taking the time. You've been, from what I understand, crazy busy flying all over North America, the world. Where have you been?
I've done 3 trips between the U.S. and Asia in the last 4 months. So I have lots of miles that I've accumulated this year.
Lots of miles. Only flying business class now. Business class and first class.
Business class when I'm allowed.
When you're allowed. There you go. Well, okay. So let's jump into it. Okay, tell me who you are and what Chain.io is.
Wow. Who am I? I am a person who somewhere in the last 25 years went from being a tech nerd to a supply chain nerd. And I would pin that. So I got into this whole industry about 25 years ago, got a job in the newspaper. Before then, I used to install PCs at law firms, like the kid crawling under the desks and plugging in stuff This is before like a law firm, you would have an IT department. They used to just bring in a consultant who would hire some high school kids and we'd go set up networks and whatever needed to be done. But we started working for a customs broker in 99. That customs broker created a supply chain management platform, very similar to, say, InfoNexus or systems like that. Back in the early 2000s, I had the luxury of getting to go work for that, what we used to call an ASP, an application service provider, which now you would just call a SaaS platform. And we helped build some of those very early supply chain management collaboration platforms for large wearing apparel companies. And in that, I kind of saw how interesting the supply chain problems were and how much more interesting they were than figuring out the size of the disk that we needed in the server to support the supply chain problems. So I became a programmer by happenstance. I became a product manager. I ended up becoming, ended up doing all the jobs. And so one of the things that was really interesting in doing all the jobs was you get a really unique perspective on where the actual problems are versus the obvious problems. And one of those was I had left that company and started a company doing customs classification software. And that got acquired by a customs broker. And I love customs, actually. I still love customs classification. It's a whole nother interesting set of problems. But in that, I ended up sort of running sales and IT at the same time. And I started realizing that the exchanging of information between companies was the blocker to sales. Not just sales from a tech standpoint, but we were trying to sell a unified customs brokerage service and tech service, and both of them needed that integration before anything could happen. And so this is 2016. SaaS had not boomed yet in supply chain at that point, but I saw it coming. And because I was running the IT department, I saw how much SaaS we were starting to buy in the back office and said, this is going to happen in supply chain. And said, so somebody needs to get out ahead of this and help companies exchange data more effectively than making a year-long project every time something has to happen, which is where the world was back then. And so that was the genesis of Chain as the premise of the company at the beginning, and this is held true, is we drew a triangle on a piece of paper and said there's software companies, there's shippers, and there's logistics service providers. And most things in supply chain move value around that triangle. Make it easier for the software company, or the software companies make it easier for the shipper at the cost of the freight forwarder doing more work, or the freight forwarder's job is getting easier, but now the software company has to make a customization. And I said, we need to do something that generates value for all of them. And so that was the premise of chain, was if you build a neutral network, you build a platform on which people can exchange data, then you're basically rising the entire water level for the industry instead of just doing a project for one company.
Right. So let's take a step back. I want to dig in a little bit, because this might seem obvious to a certain set of people, but I don't think that it is. Especially if you don't do IT projects, but specifically supply chain products on the regular, right? Mm-hmm. So every project in the supply chain involves many parties, maybe many parties, right? So on average, and again, our focus is always on the importer, the BCO, so like that side of things, typically not the freight forwarder side. You deal all over the place. But if we're taking a look at the BCO, if you're looking to do any kind of supply chain project, one of the first things that you're going to need to do, or that needs to be done, probably not you as the person, is to get data flowing from one place to another. Okay, that is pervasive, like everywhere for every single project, right? And you basically have, what previously wasn't a choice, but now you have two choices, right? The first one was you could do it yourself, right? And use your IT group to do that integration. The other option that exists, so and just on that one point, if you're using your own IT group, they really don't have a solid expertise in just this one thing. They're generalists. Mm-hmm. They do lots of things all over the place, right? I think the brilliance and the innovation that Chain came to the table with is that this is actually a real skill set that is required virtually everywhere. And in the integration piece between two different parties, one of the things that really is required, which is not obvious, is the standardization of that data set. Mm-hmm. Right? And maybe you can talk a little bit about that, because I actually think there's something else that's really important as well. But I do want to understand this idea that when you're putting two systems together, it's not always obvious how that goes.
Yeah. So let's take even one more step back, and then we can answer that. Integration, moving data around seems to be almost the only thing that companies do nowadays. Unless companies at the level of, like the large brands, right? Like someone else is making the product, someone else is moving the product, someone else is selling the product, someone else is, Amazon's selling it, DHL's moving it, you've got a contract manufacturer making it, but you were orchestrating all this. So your whole company is there effectively to design things and then move information around. Like those are the two things you do. And sometimes you don't even decide them, right? Sometimes you're just buying from someone and selling someone else. But if you go into the marketing department or the HR department and you say, okay, I've got to move data around. One of the most classic things that everyone can understand is I'm going to have HubSpot here doing my marketing, and I got Salesforce here doing my customer relationship manage, and I want to get a lead from HubSpot into Salesforce. Well, there are certain things that you can do that are really easy in that problem. First of all, and I say it's easy, it's easier. You own your instance of HubSpot and you own your instance of Salesforce. So if there's a field that you need in both of them, you just make the field in one that matches the other, right? The second is you own those systems, meaning you control the APIs. I need to set up a connection here and a connection here, and I want the two to talk to each other. So yes, it's a lot of work, and yes, it's still a pain in the ass, but it's your pain in the ass. right? You control it. Supply chain's team sport, right? So now I've got that example of I've got to get inventory to Amazon. I've got to get messages from DHL. I've got to get my customs broker messages. The information's everywhere, and it's all called different things all the time, right? So this gets back to your question about standards, which is if DHL decides that they want to call the reference that you give them about, so that you know what shipment we're talking about, the customer reference, because from their perspective, it's the customer reference. But in your world, you are the customer. You don't wake up every morning going, hi, my name is Joe and I'm DHL's customer, right? Like that's not how you self-identify. You identify as someone who makes things. And so this is your shipment number. So in your system, it's called the shipment number. Customer reference over here, shipment over here. They've got a shipment number, but that's their file number. You don't actually care about that unless you're going on their website. And in your system, that's called the carrier tracking number. Or maybe it's called the forwarder tracking number because you also want the booking number from the ocean carrier, right? Which DHL calls the carrier booking number, and you call the ocean tracking number because somebody wrote your system 30 years ago and didn't know that there was air freight. So you always call it the ocean tracking number, even for air freight. So now you've got 6 references for the same shipment, right? It's one box full of widgets. It's going to go from Shanghai to LA, and you have 6 different reference fields filled with 3 values. Traditionally, what has happened is companies have tried one of 2 things. Either they've gone to an independent standards body, GS1, ISO, whoever it is, created a standard and said, everyone in the world, stop it. This field is called this, and that's it, and we're done. And then you now have 3 standards bodies all telling you to do a different thing. And okay, so we haven't really solved the problem. We've just made it actually probably worse. Or the other thing that they've done is they've said, hey, I'm a big company. DHL, I don't care what you call it. When you interact with us, you will call that the ocean tracking number. And if not, you don't get our money, right? And so we have this big hammer, which is all of our money and all of our freight, and we're going to hit you with it until you comply. That worked very well when it was the largest companies, the Walmarts of the world, the Coca-Colas of the world, going and working and being able to do that. But it doesn't really scale, and it doesn't make it really fast when supply chain disruption happens. You say, hey, suddenly I can't use DHL in this region for this reason, and I got to go use UPS. Well, now I got 10 years of modifications that I had DHL do that UPS doesn't know anything about and that I didn't document. What do I do, right? So now I go slow, and it takes me a year to get UPS on board. And then I go on and on and on, down hundreds and hundreds or thousands of providers. What we decided was, let's not solve the problem of making everyone agree. Let's build a common model in the middle. So inside of Chain.io, there's a data model, and we have a thing called shipper reference. We have a thing called forwarder reference. We have a thing called carrier reference and a thing called carrier booking number. You don't have to know which one we put where, but what we promise you is that if you either use our specs or use the plugins that we've built to other people's software already. So you take our Infor Nexus plugin at the shipper or our 3rd.wave plugin or whatever the case may be, and you take on the other side the DHL plugin or the CargoWise plugin, that they'll put those things in the right spot, because in the middle, we've decided what we think they're called, and then we just make these adapters that interpret that. So we said, we're just going to stop fighting about it. Instead of being right, we said, let everyone be wrong in their own special way for their own special reasons, because you kind of, and I tell my kids this, or my son this all the time, you can choose to be right or you can choose to be happy. And you can't always have both. And so we decided, like, we're not going to ask everyone to be right. We're going to ask everyone to be happy.
Well, so that's, okay. Firstly, very wise, I think. It's a wise decision. I love that, saying that you can be right and you can be happy, but those 2 things, you can tell it to your wife as well, I'm sure.
I'm smart.
She could tell it to you. But It's one of my big frustrations that I run into in this space is this pervasive desire for standardization as if that's the solution to the problem, right? And I think that you're trying to get people to agree on stuff, on what we need to call things, is both not necessarily workable, but also kind of foolish. The simple fact is that the supply chain comes in different perspectives and different flavors, and it is totally reasonable for a DHL of the world to have a customer number for something, a customer shipment, something like that. And it is also totally reasonable for their customer, being the importer, to have their shipment number, and that those two things might be the same, but they could be called something different, right? And trying to get them to say, no, they should both be called the shipment number, maybe superficially makes sense until you impute a forwarder or a carrier on top of it, in which case they're going to look at it totally differently, right? And so your solution that you've developed is a very elegant solution to the problem, which is that everybody has their own way of seeing a set of data that is the same data, perhaps, or same data element, and that they would interpret it as a different thing. And that, to me, seems like the appropriate analysis and solution to the problem.
You know who always asks me about standards? Other software people.
Oh.
You know who never asked me about standards? An import manager who's 40 shipments behind and hasn't been home for 2 days because they just solved my problem. Right. And I think that's the thing that comes up over and over and over again. And is this idea of like these deeply theoretical topics are interesting to me, but not germane to like the day-to-day life of the people who are trying to move boxes around, right? Like,
well, no. So what it is? So like, I could tell you what it is. It's, listen, if I'm a software platform provider. Mm-hmm. If I could shoot for one standard, my life is so unbelievably easier. Right. That I want to talk about standards. And I want my life to be made easier, except it's not about me, and it's not about my team or 3rd Wave. It's largely about the other players in the industry. And generally speaking, it is a very hard time to get anybody to agree on anything, right? And so we've taken the perspective at 3rd Wave is for virtually everything. We have no ability to influence how people see things, how people ingest things, and that we have to adjust and understand that there are going to be 6 reference numbers for one data element, and that's just the way it is. And so I find it there's so much time and ink spilled on this idea of standards, and by no means am I against people pushing towards coming up with standards that make sense so that we could all it will make everybody's life easier and better. I just think that it's a lot of work, and generally speaking, when you have a lot of people that you got to get onto a standard, either it's going to be regulated or it's not going to work. Those are your 2 options.
Very, very much, and we are in a deregulated industry. Correct.
And I don't think that this element of it is not where the regulation is going to come almost at all.
No.
So the solution has to be something like what you're doing, right? And I think it's great that there is at least one, there are probably a couple others, but that this is what you focus on very cleanly as a service.
So one of the things that you said 3rd Wave doesn't matter in that equation.
Yeah.
Our founding principle is that you do. right? Because if you're able to service your customers better because the data is moving more efficiently, they're happy. Like everybody, I mean, ultimately, everyone works for the end consumer at the end of the day, right? Like all the way up, right? No matter how many steps removed you are, like at some point, there's an exchange of an actual thing for money, and we're all supporting that. But and that was sort of the thing that frustrated me as a CIO, right? At a customs broker, was sitting there and going, okay, we just got this new piece of business. They have this specialized need. I need to go back now to my customs brokerage software provider and ask them to make a mod. They are unhappy. They're going to charge me money, which makes me unhappy. I can't charge my customer. But even if I give them the money, they're pissed off because the time they're spending on this mod for me is time they're taking away from making general product improvements. And they don't want to do that, even if I'm willing to pay them for it. It's dirty money. And so the whole thing is that it does matter. And as a CIO, I had to behave as if I had no empathy for my software providers because I had to get things done. But I had a lot of empathy because we were building products internally. At the same time, I was going back and asking for those modifications. And so I knew, like, I was dealing with the same problem. And it is about, as our friend Sarah says, everything's about collaboration, right? And it is about like this collaborative value of like knowing that, if I'm going to go out, if I'm a retail brand and I want to use 3rd Wave and I also want to use a CO2 tracking platform and I also want to use, a risk management platform and I also want to connect directly to my ocean carriers and I also want to book online with Freightos and I want to do all these things, that if I go to all of them and badger them to do it exactly the way I want to do it, I'm just creating a bad outcome for myself because they're all going to take time away from their product roadmaps to make my customization, which makes my life worse at the end anyway. So companies should consider the impact that their requests are having on their software providers, because software providers have finite hours in the day. And if they're spending them customizing something for you, they're not doing the new AI thing that you're badgering them to do.
Right. No, that's true. And
so you're important too, buddy.
well, thank you. I do appreciate that. No, and what I guess the point I was making is I'm important to you because I'm your customer, right? I'm not important to the international supply chain world, right? Or at least I am as important as any other node in that world, which means I'm not. I mean, there are a billion nodes in this world. I'm but one of them, and the work. It is easier to create a chain that solves the problem, a chain.io that solves the problem, than it is to get the million players to agree. And
that's the theory. Yes.
Well, I think it had, again, whether you're successful and you happen to be or not, there'll be the next chain.io or whatever that's going to try, and someone like you is going to win the day. And there's a much better chance of the chain winning the day, and you get big enough so that everybody just happens to use whatever is your standard or however you design things, than there is for somebody to mandate it down, right? Someone big is going to win the day and come with, it will be the de facto standard.
No, I actually don't think that's true.
No? Okay, so tell me why.
Because, and I had this discussion during the pandemic with some of the people here in the US and in the government. And they were like, we got to fix the supply chain. I said, let's transpose your language to a different problem set. If you don't walk into the Treasury Department and say, fix the money, right? Like, you have to be more specific than that, right? Like, I want to fix subprime mortgages, or I want to fix interest rates, or I want to fix inflation. But you don't fix money. Money is just like this abstract category of thing. Supply chain is so big and so encompasses so much and so many things that I think it actually actively, and it's an innovation platform. It's where companies compete with each other. So they don't actually want to standardize the business process. Like I say this over and over again, but Walmart doesn't want to have Amazon's supply chain, and Amazon doesn't want to have Walmart's supply chain, right? They have their own supply chains. They might like things that they do, but you don't just lift one out and drop it into another. And, certainly Ford does not want to have Nestle's supply chain, right? And Nestle doesn't want to have Ford. So I don't think it is. I think there are spaces where there's standardization, like, there's companies like Alemica who have spent a lot of time in chemical, making very strong standards that work really well in chemical. And there are similar things in automotive and what have you. But I think that there's a point at which a problem is so big and so abstract that it's more about interoperability. I think there may be 50 chains out there at some point. And I know there was one founded recently, but like kind of a clone of what we do, that have to interop between each other. But I don't think it's like the phone system where you're like, if everyone doesn't do exactly the same thing, nothing works. I think it's about interop.
Well, no, so I probably agree with that. Other than there are certain, I mean, you said maybe one concept that I don't know that I agree with, which is, so the idea, you're using a term, it's probably the use of your term that I disagree with more than the concept itself. When you say there are lots of supply chains, it's true. Like if you were to look at any organization, you use, Ford and Nestle. I mean, of course, those are two different, they're different on a number of different levels. One's a car manufacturer, one's a food manufacturer, one, gets parts made all around the world, one sources from plantations or something like that for cocoa. Obviously those players are going to be, dramatically different. Having said that, the Fords of the world and the Nestles of the world use virtually the same service providers to do virtually the same activities as it relates in the movement of goods through the international supply chain. So, for instance, a container moving from a plantation to Nestle's manufacturing facility, and a container moving from some manufacturer in Shanghai to a domestic plant are using the same transportation process with the same service providers, and they have virtually no ability to impact what that looks like, right? And so they don't get to choose what the vessels are. They don't get to choose what the containers look like, by and large. They're going to be 20 foot or 40 foot cans. There's a lot. So there's a lot that they have no impact on, and that is totally consistent across all the players in the industry. And where I think the differences within individual supply chains is really call it the BCO or the importer or the shipper, their interaction with that supply chain. So for instance, the Fords of the world have to be able to understand where all their various components are at any point in time, because they're working on it just in time, and they have to understand that they don't want the line to be shut down. And so the way they need to see that the movement of their product and their shipments through the supply chain is quite particular to Ford. And that's going to be quite particular, even, if you look at Chrysler or Chrysler, GM, Ferrari, they're all going to have all of those auto companies are going to have a slightly different view as to how they would interact with the service providers within that supply chain. But the actual supply chain, like the service provider world, at least in our experience, is like very, very consistent. Would you agree with that or not?
No, I agree with that. And I think what's interesting to me about a lot of that is, in almost all cases, the standards that are needed to do the mechanical transactions, right? I need to book something. I need a milestone update on something. I need a financial transaction to show that I'm going to pay for something, for the movement of my goods, or, even I want to send a purchase order to my supplier, right? Like every one of those standards that covers almost every problem for almost every commodity in the world has existed for 30 years, right?
Yes.
Like we don't use them very well.
It's longer. You're old now. It was 30 years, 20
It
years
was
ago.
30 years when I started. It's like 50 years now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, like the ANSI or EDIFACT standards, and the fact that there's two is like actually the root of the thing. But like
comical, maybe.
But like when we went to design our internal model, one of the things I was like, okay, what does a shipment look like? And I had 20 years of experience when we started, and I had developers on my team who had the same amount of experience. First thing we did was we just went online and downloaded a bunch of 856 EDIs. Said, what does everyone have in their 856 EDIs to make sure we didn't miss anything? Right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly
it works, right? It's like so, and there's new problems that you need new standards for. Like there's no CO2 accounting in an 856 EDI, so you got to deal with some of those things. But but I think getting back to chain for a second, the whole thing is if you want to use an ANSI EDI and your service provider wants to use an EDIFACT EDI, it used to be that you would like get in a room and you would stare at each other. And I remember sitting in these meetings and I would be clocking in the meeting. I'd be like, who's the dumbest IT person in this room? Because we're going to use whatever they have, because that's the only way the project's going to get done, right? Like I want to use an API, they want to use FTP, and they don't know what an API is yet. We're going to use the FTP because otherwise we're never going to get this project done, right? So you just went down to the lowest common denominator, but that was the insight we had. And the thing that people find great value in is if you use TMS X and I need an EDI or I need, this custom API because I built this homegrown system 20 years ago. Okay. You give the data to chain in your native TMS standpoint, and they'll give it to me in my proprietary, API for my new system, and everyone can go home, right? Like,
So yeah. So I think that's so awesome. Now I want to dig in a little bit into a problem that I've been writing about. I want to understand how it impacts you or how you've experienced it, and you're dealing at the actual data level and where the complications occur. So let's imagine I'm an importer, and okay, as an importer, what do I care about? I care about where is basically all the stakeholders in my organization care about where is the product, right? That these things called shipments are moving around the world is a nice construct that simplifies a lot of things for a lot of people, but not for me. I care about, I have a certain SKU and a certain container that is a certain somewhere, and I need to know where this, so either a stakeholder within the organization needs to know where that is, or my customer is expecting it and they need to know where it is. And what is missed a lot by a lot of people is that when somebody's asking for where is the shipment, they actually don't give a shit as to where the shipment is. They care where the product is, right? Now, there's a group within every importer called the transportation team, and their role to a large extent is to be the translator of shipments to products and products to shipments, because, well, nobody really has a system that's capable of doing it, and they're the only ones that know where the shipments are, and so they're the only ones that possibly could go through this exercise even though they hate it. My point is, though, that will lead to the question, is that there seems to be a fundamental problem in the orientation of an ERP and the way it's designed, and its interaction with the broader supply chain, which is highly operational focused. So imagine, like, every service provider in the supply chain, whether you're a carrier or forward or whatever you are, is going to orient around a shipment, right? And so that's a very clean thing. There are going to be complications in integrating those things, but they're all designed under a similar rubric, whereas the ERP doesn't understand what a shipment is. They have nothing. There's no construct in a ERP that is shipment. And so, and one could argue that there also is no construct within the ERP for product. That's a different conversation for another day. But this is a significant problem, right? Where the importer cares about product, the world deals in shipments, and now there's this sort of awkward dance for how do I get information from the supply chain back into the ERP, translated in a way that makes sense to the ERP, even though it's not oriented to really interface with the outside world. So I'm wondering how does that manifest in your world, and how do you go about trying to solve that?
So, right, there's some layers to this.
No, there are. There's a
lot of layers.
There are
layers.
So let me.
I'm going to try to break down a couple of things here, and we'll see how we do. One, my view is you can actually extend your thing about they only care where the product to there's actually only 3 things that an organization cares about at all when it comes to supply chain: available to promise date, when is something going to be fulfilled, landed cost, how much is it going to cost to do it, and carbon. What's the environmental impact, which is the new one? I used to say there was only 2.
You've updated for 2024.
I've updated for 2024, right? So carbon accounting, right? That's the 3rd one, right? And I would actually put there's other social things. So like global impact, let's call it.
Sure.
Okay, so all of that. So then you're right that, look, I can buy SAP's TM model and add it to my SAP core ERP, and now I have the concept of shipment. But it is an appendage. It's an appendage.
Just to be, A, it's an appendage, and B, we need to be clear that if you're going to buy SAP TM, you are essentially buying a third-party transportation management tool, right?
Yes.
And you're going to integrate it, right?
Yeah, whether it's SAP TM or 3rd.wave, or whether it's like my point is, yes, it is actually, that is exactly my point. It is a third-party appendage that is added on, whether it's under the same logo or not.
Right.
So the way we solve the problem is you have to think about data as a factor of time. I'm going to get overly theoretical here, but like the order comes out and the order knows about the product, right? I know this thing I want. I'm then going to put that order on a shipment, and it is my responsibility as a shipper. And this is where shippers shoot themselves in the foot all day, every day. It is my responsibility as a shipper to tell my freight forwarder and my customs broker, this is what's going to be in the box in an electronic format in a granular way long before the packing list is created. Right? I need to say, I cannot, if I want to have a properly managed supply chain, I cannot send an email to my freight forwarder saying, book me a 40 from Shanghai to LA. I have just ruined my supply chain by saying that. I need to say, I am sending you an electronic file with all 3,000 lines of brake pads that are going to fill this container, and all the purchase order details and all of the SKU information that you don't need in order to book it with MSC. Like MSC doesn't care. General Auto Parts, done, right? I need to give you that electronically so that you can give it back to me later. Because if I don't do that, then you don't have it. You can't give it back to me. And you're certainly not going to sit there and type it all in, right? That's an unfair ask as well. And the data quality issues on that are a nightmare, even if I'm willing to do it as a service provider. So I have to start the chain of custody well on that data. Right. Once I do that, actually everything else in that is easy, because almost every freight management system inside of any supply chain company of any size at this point can handle that data. But I, as a service provider, cannot handle typing it all in for you. And if I don't know about it until the vendor gives me a packing list, which is going to be wrong anyway, by the way, because they're going to accidentally put their part number on it instead of your part number, and then everything's screwed up. or they're going to give me the commercial invoice number where they're supposed to give me your purchase order. It's just everything goes wrong. If you don't have a system like 3rd Wave or that's going to push out that data to me in a structured, consistent, organized manner, then you can't expect it back. And now you can say, hey, I don't need it back because I'm going to give you that customer reference number, and that's going to link back and tell me, and I'm going to assume that what I asked to be ordered was what the vendor packed into the box, and that box made that ship, which is bullshit. And that's where everything falls apart. And now you're in a worse position because you tell your stakeholder, oh, there's 600 of these things arriving on Tuesday because I ordered 600 and that order made it onto that shipment. And what you don't realize is that moved it through a CFS and 3 of the boxes didn't make it onto your shipment, right? And your freight forwarder can't tell you that because all they know is it's this shipment reference. And the vendor gave me 80 boxes instead of 83, and I put them on the thing and I did my job, right? So if you don't start that chain of custody good, and you don't watch that, and you don't have to watch every piece of data move through, it's like 4 or 5 things. It's part, quantity, order number. Like that, there's probably a couple others if I wasn't doing this off my head, but you want to trace that all the way through. But it all starts with issuing a booking with the same discipline that you issue your order to your supplier.
Right.
And even that, obviously, and you know this as well as I do, I'm assuming that people issue orders properly to the suppliers, which 90% of companies don't do. But if they use good software, this is the software provider's job, is to make your business run better, that's not ones and zeros, right? It's not the screen's pretty or there's a dot on a map. It's, I'm going to make your business process better because I'm not going to let you send a booking until you pack it with the order lines that you expect on that booking. Therefore, when you get the data back, I'm going to tell you, oh, only one of the 2 containers shipped, and this is the stuff that was in the container that got rolled, and this is the stuff that was in the container that's going to arrive. Right. And by the way, the hot order that you have for Walmart is on the one that got rolled, and the inventory product that's destined for your DC is on the one that didn't get rolled. Do you want to switch and send that stuff to Walmart? You can make that decision now.
Right. So, okay, so you said something that was interesting and just got me thinking about intelligent document processing, formerly known as OCR. And I'm curious, what have you guys dabbled in creating data from PDFs?
No.
Is that you have not?
We have not touched it. And maybe I'm overly principled in this. I think that there is a lot of value in doing that as your path of last resort, or when you don't have access to solve the root problem. But it is always a Band-Aid, because that PDF, someone has taken structured data and turned it into unstructured data. And now you're trying to take that unstructured data and turn it back into structured data. Just go get the structured data. Right now, I understand if there are spaces in the supply chain where that's a non-starter, right? If I'm a freight forwarder who deals in high volumes of small customers who I'm not managing their supply chain for them, I'm just moving the freight for them, definitely OCR all day, every day. I'm expecting off the street business. I don't have an ongoing relationship, but if the amount of times that I've seen like Fortune 100 companies OCRing their own packing lists. That's what makes me mad. And the market that we serve is those companies, not, our smallest, if you want to sign up for Chain today, the smallest thing we will sell you is $30,000 a year. You're not doing that for 5 shipments, right? And most of our customers are spending, mid high 6-figure numbers. So we're solving with a group of people who should be doing better, and we want them to do better.
Right. No. So that's exactly. Yeah. The reason I bring it up is our primary market, as you know, is like the mid market, right? So not the Fortune 100 companies that ought to know better. It's the the $1 billion to $5 billion company that, let's say, is a textiles company that has 80 mills overseas, and these mills are reasonably low tech, right? And so while our customer can issue purchase orders all day, there's no method on the vendor side or the manufacturer side of responding with, hey, this is all the product that we have available ready to ship. Please create a container for me and tell me what you want in that container so that I can then put this stuff in, so that now, I being our customer, has a packing list in digital format, right? If they're going to do it, they're going to do it on a spreadsheet, and now it's basically a PDF, right? And so the challenge is, how do you solve that problem in a non-Fortune 500 company where this is just sort of like the endemic nature of the business, and you don't have the heft to force people to.
I'll tell you how we're solving it. I'll tell you how we're solving it, the really ugly way that it gets solved, even in the big companies, right? So we have a customer whose their suppliers are some of the largest companies in the world, right? So they buy chips, right? Qualcomm, Intel, NVIDIA, right? So you'd be like, oh, these are like these magic supply chains, right?
Magic, sophisticated, the most
magically sophisticated supply chains. The majority of those companies send us spreadsheets. What we made sure that we did, and the same thing would apply if it was OCR, is in Chain.io, in the middle, when the data comes in that unstructured way, the plugin to our customer, to their ERP or the TMS, that plugin has all the validation logic. So whether we get an so like they have one vendor sends us an EDI, one makes an API call, third one emails us a spreadsheet. All of them move into the Chain.io data format with no validation. So we just take the data. If the data, our customer has made rules in their plugin with inside of Chain's cloud that says, oh, the ASN number is always 34 characters and follows this format, and it's got the vendor code here and this. The inventory ID should always have this structure. They have all of those checks. And when we reject the spreadsheet, we don't reject it back to the IT department inside of our customer like an EDI problem. We reject it with an email directly back to the vendor that says, hey, your spreadsheet was flat out rejected. Your vendor KPI says you have to get this thing in between 24 hours before shipping or whatever it is. Fix it. So the data quality, and you could do this with OCR, same thing, but the point is that you push the data quality check to the ingestion point. You never let the customer's system get the dirty data. You don't validate it there. You validate it, you protect the system with this eggshell around it, the eggshell chain. Then all the smarts happen down in the TMS, but you put the onus not on this is what we got wrong 20 years ago. That error would happen, it would go to an EDI department. The EDI department would call the other EDI department. The other EDI department would eventually call operations. They'd fix the data. They'd send the EDI. Now we just give everyone a login to Chain because it's a network, and that vendor gets an error. They can click in, they see their transaction, they can hit reprocess, they can drop a new transaction, and they can do whatever they need to do. And it's self-healing from the perspective of our customer. Right. Because the vendor's KPI is not about EDI. It's, you need this information to be in my TMS 24 hours before departure.
Right.
That's it. That's a business KPI. Right?
Right.
Whether you want to send Chain a spreadsheet and fix it 44 times or do a proper API integration or an EDI, that's up to you. If you, Intel, don't want to put the resources into that, just get your KPI done. And this is what we coach our customer, is don't even look at how many times they're sending it. As long as they're hitting the business need, it's their problem. If they want to use OCR on the front end of that to make the spreadsheet, it's fine. I as the retailer, shouldn't care.
Right. No, it's such a good perspective to have. And I would say it's a solution that is not too dissimilar to what we've done, in 3rd Wave and where in the future probably we're using Chain as opposed to doing it ourselves, which is, for one of these types of customers, we create a spreadsheet, which is a standard locked spreadsheet, essentially, that the vendor, the low-tech vendor, manufacturer, mill, whatever, fills out, which is sort of like an ASN / packing list. They type everything in, they send it to an email address, we ingest it, and if there are mistakes, it goes back to them. And then all of a sudden we're able to get structured data, pseudo-structured data that we can ingest and turn into data with reasonable ease. The reason that the AI sort of IDP has become interesting to us is that, again, for one of the for a 3rd wave, where we have a finite set of customers, most of those customers have a finite set of vendors. It's a very, very different challenge from even if it were OCR, although OCR was never good enough, but from a character recognition perspective, one of the challenges that, let's say, a forwarder would have, where they're sort of like a retail forwarder, they have, customers that have hundreds or thousands of vendors, and they're getting commercial invoices all over the place, or packings all over the place from everywhere. They're almost never getting a repeat. They have to be able to support everything. Whereas our customers have a very finite set of vendors, and the invoices from those vendors are going to be exactly repeatable every time, whether it's 20 vendors or 100 vendors or 500 vendors. It's always going to be the same packing list and commercial invoice, right? And AI has proven to be, these new IDP systems, reasonably successful and lightweight implementations at trying to or at turning those PDFs into data pretty consistently. And so anyhow, it's interesting to learn how you guys are tackling or not tackling.
Again, I think there is value in that software. And I think sometimes one of the things as a founder and as a CEO, regardless of being a founder, is also choosing what your thing is, right?
Yeah.
And that's not our thing. Now, we have customers who also say use RAF to do that work. And then the RAF data hits us, and then it becomes, because we pick it up after it's become semi-structured, right?
Yeah.
Like, that is a thing that is totally, like, you can chain software together. I didn't do it. That was not on purpose.
There's a name in there somewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, so the linked software together. But if it's me and I have a finite amount of AI dollars to spend or resources to spend, I am so much more interested in tell me what's actually wrong with this data, or what I can do better with this shipment, right? Like, your vendor just told us that they're shipping this thing. Did you know, that Everstream is telling us that that's about to move through hurricanes? They just ship it from the Bahamas in September, right? Like, what are you doing, guys? Come on, don't place that order in the first place, right? Or, Altana telling us, did you know that vendor has been convicted of smuggling 6 times under a different legal entity in the last 5 years, right? Like, that's where, or just the simple, like, hey, the vendor didn't book today, and I have an entire Origin office just calling them every day. Let me use AI to make that phone call, right? Like, all of those things to me are more interesting than the repeatable data ingestion problem.
Right. Yeah, fair enough. All right. Well, listen, I'm just looking at the time, and this hour has flown by. Right. Is there anything that the listener should know that we haven't discussed about you, about Chain?
I want to mention one thing that we're very excited about. And depending on where this airs, maybe you heard it first, or it might be you heard it last week. We are announcing an integration with Snowflake. And the reason that this integration is particularly interesting to our customers is, in the past, generally, you've used Chain to move something from one system to another. And that model we have in the middle, you don't even care about. What the Snowflake integration is going to do is you're going to start bringing data in, and in that common data structure, so you get data from 5 sources, they come in, we will be writing the data for you into Snowflake, and we'll be expanding this to other data, big data systems in the future in our normalized structure. So suddenly you can say, I want to get CO2 data from one source, ASNs from another, and that customer reference field is going to be called the right thing in all of them in one database. And it's going to allow you to replay data over time. There was an interesting problem. One of our customers came, they said, we don't know how many times we changed the delivery location on a purchase order. Like we tell our freight forwarder, it's shipping in Indianapolis, and then we move it to Dallas, and we move it back to Indy, and then we move it to Dallas again because we're replanning things. And the forwarder's mad at us, but we don't actually know how often this happens without going back through old emails. Well, we're going to capture every time you send that order in one database. You'll be able to time travel through your data, right, and run analytics on that. And it's all going to be in one. That whole problem we spent the first 40 minutes of this talking about common standards and common data. It's going to be in one database, in one structure. So your AI people spend time doing AI instead of scrubbing data. So we're very, very excited about this plugin.
Yeah. And maybe the next time you come out, we can talk about it. we can go deep in a lot of this AI stuff, because there's a lot of things. I find there's a lot of sort of like hand waving and we're magic wanding around. This won't be a problem because AI. It's like, well, there are like lots of things that have to be solved for AI to do their magic. And I don't think we've solved a lot of the underlying problems.
One of them is high quality data.
Yes, that's exactly right.
That's the one that we as Chain, this is our focus, is getting you high quality data about your supply chain.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And last question, where can people find you?
Chain.io. Name is our address. And then, I'm very active on LinkedIn, as is the company, and we're very careful. If you subscribe to the company, we actually post things about the industry and what's going on. It's not just selling. And same with my LinkedIn. It's the only social media that I'm on. And but I try to be personable when I'm there.
Perfect. And you do a very good job of that. I highly suggest people follow Brian on LinkedIn.
You get to see a lot of background videos of me wandering around the streets of Philadelphia, which is always fun.
The streets of Philadelphia and airports.
That's right.
Yeah. So anyway, listen, Brian, this is a real pleasure. I really appreciate your time, your insight. I always find it so fascinating talking to you. You have, lots of people never actually get into the data. They have these very high level discussions and they're able to ignore a whole bunch of things, but you lose that luxury when you actually have to deal with the data and the real problems. And so as somebody who likes to talk about real problems, you're one of the top on the list. So I'm glad we had this chat, and look forward to having you back.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to 3rd Wave Trade Talks. To get in touch and learn more about what we do, visit our website at 3rdwave.co. There you'll find more resources to enrich your knowledge of global trade. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you next time.